First thing that we have to start with is what's your name, profession, titles, all of that.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Misty Beck. I'm a professor of English literature. My PhD was from Washington University in St. Louis in way back in the last century. I have worked at Farmington in a capacity first as a visiting assistant professor from 2006 to 2010. I left during, basically it was a visiting gig that was supposed to last a year, and I stretched it out for 4 years. And I love Maine and didn't want to leave, so I worked at Bates College for the next 8 years, dividing my time between being a writing specialist and being an adjunct faculty member in environmental studies with a humanities focus, which is where my work has gravitated towards. Here at Farmington, I've been back part-time as a lecturer in humanities. Again, environmental humanities has become my thing. I study literature and writing and culture and the way that we relate to land. I've taught classes here in Farmington recently in women writing the wild, because women, like people of color, have often been excluded from national places, national parks, and public wild spaces. And there's a rich literature, very hard to fit everybody in. So that has been one of the courses that I've taught here in an English writing capacity, teaching students to write while they're thinking about how women write and relate to the wild, and people of color as well in that course. And then the gardening course I just taught in May term. It was supposed to be Dig It, community gardening, and because of the pandemic, it became Dig It All, or digital community gardening. And I had a wonderful section this past May through June, and Gretchen Legler is picking up the second section now. I've taught classes in the literature of agriculture at Bates College that had a very strong community service component, which is part of, it fed into the design of what we were doing. And I can talk more about community service and gardening and the campus community at any point.
What was the original idea for the garden? Where did that come from? And how has you sort of helped to shape that idea?
Well, there's long been a push for having a community garden here. Drew Barton is somebody whose students designed a plan 2 or 3 years ago. And even around the same time or further back, they tried a small community garden where they grew onions behind the honors house. I was teaching a course in the spring, this past spring. It was called Working the Land. And some of my students and I talked a lot about the importance of having a community garden. In that course, we were really looking a lot at memoirs and first-person experiences with gardening and experiences with gardening in community settings. Again, with a couple of works by people of color who were providing a lot of history in terms of the relationship of people of color to farming. Being in Farmington, being interested in indigenous studies, and having heard the folklore ever since I arrived here that Farmington was long an area that Native Americans used for agriculture, and yet not knowing any scholarship or any actual stories beyond that. That was part of the other idea, was to be able to understand where farming was here in Farmington. So at the same time that I was working with my honors seminar on issues of land and ownership, and I'm sorry, not land and ownership, although that's part of it, but land and farming and agriculture in the area. Um, Gretchen Legler was finishing her degree, and I'm sure she'll talk to you about that, and thinking about ways that she could work to connect people to the land. We both felt like students were really missing what you would call a connection to the real, and to really doing things that weren't so abstract, that weren't always online. All of this is before COVID. Meanwhile, so the two of us she was on staff, she was on faculty when I first arrived at Farmington, and we've been friends for those many, many years. So we were having conversations, while at the same time, Bud Martin was working with people from the Agricultural Extension Office here and around the state. Bud has had a long connection with poverty studies and with rural agriculture, and has in fact done some other kinds of community-based food growing for food giving away. And he alerted us to something called the Hunger Dialogue, which has been going on in the state for quite a while, dealing with issues of food security. And for Bud, in the past, these issues have had a lot more to do with seniors, and they pick a particular population to work on. This is an annual conference that is scheduled to be held at Farmington in October. He, at the time the writing house was coming down, which is the site of the community garden, wrote a very quick and brief proposal to be able to have raised beds on the spot to be able to grow food for the Hunger Dialogue. He also knew that they needed to teach. At the same time, I had created a poster for our Dig It All community garden. He invited me to a meeting with one of the extension officers, Dave Fuller from Franklin County, and asked if my class could coordinate with the Hunger Dialogue. And I said, yes, that's community service. It's a service project. It addresses directly the issue of hunger on campus, which in my work with Drew Barton and the Sustainable Campus Coalition over the course of the semester, I was seeing as more and more of a problem. So all of that came together, and then the pandemic struck. So we had to reinvent ways to do this.
What are some of the ways that we have been reinventing ways to do this over the course of COVID?
Sure. Well, I had some experience with my Women Writing the Wild class in getting up to speed online. So I redesigned the May term course to have 3 central components. One being just reading about agriculture and reading literature and about gardening. The second and the third are more interesting to this project, is creating an experiential component through whatever kind of gardening they could do at home. And there were many different projects, from ladder gardens to window boxes to having a whole acre to work on. So students had to do that and create a log. And then the third was to be able to help design the community garden. So the course that's going forward, which Gretchen I'm sure will talk to you about, we'll talk about the ways that it's going forward. My students studied accessibility and design, and how to create raised beds for people who are in wheelchairs or who have back issues and can't bend over, and then also ways to be able to use this space and create it as a design that is far beyond anything I would have ever created. So those are a couple of the ways: the experiential component and sharing that with class and with others, and then the service project, which is here on campus, to be able to create a community garden, which my students have told me they were incredibly emotionally committed to.
So from there, do you want to go further into talking about the community's needs, what sort of things that you've previously been involved in with the community, and hope to help the community?
Sure, there's a lot for the community, whether it's students on the community who are dealing with hunger or the community more broadly. When I first taught a Literatures of Agriculture course at Bates College a couple of years ago, there was a team of people there who helped connect us to community partners. And I had that experience and that model behind me. We also created a day of agriculture at a grange out in Vassalboro, where community members shared what they knew about rural tradition, about current farming and farming needs, and the fact that Maine, on the one hand, is very fortunate that we have a growing population of young farmers. We're one of the few places in the country that has young people getting into farming. And so that day of agriculture was a way to be able to bring some of that energy in. There's permaculturalists and people who are doing food distribution networks and gleaning networks. So I learned a whole lot doing that kind of community-based, almost like an agricultural fair for an afternoon with my students. We did tours of local farms. None of that can we do in the same way with COVID and with the pandemic. But one of the things that we also did that was sort of a model for the way that I tried to conceive of gardening in the time of pandemic was that my students also went out and interviewed Somali Bantu immigrant farmers. And they also interviewed people at the Whiting Farm, which is a farm where people with disabilities, particularly with autism, have used. So They recorded images, they did interviews, they created these portraits of agriculture, which is something that I thought that my students might be able to do, and perhaps will in the fall as we go forward when Gretchen and I co-teach a course, a pair of courses, an FYS and an English or an Honors 100 writing course. With the community involvement here, while I'm not in Franklin County, I'm near the border of it, and while Professor Legler was away, she sent me a call to go to the Knowlton Corner Farm. And Knowlton Corner Farms is creating both a community garden and also a gleaning network that's modeled on some of the things that I had seen on the coast and seen in mid-state. Today, on Thursday, every Thursday, from I think 10 until 3, are asking for people to contact them to volunteer to work in their commercial kitchen. So they have the licensing to be able to preserve and put up food. Arlene Masella had noticed just this incredible disconnect between the kinds of food that comes into the food bank and what people's actual needs are, and then people not wanting to go to a food bank. And so she created a call for volunteers, and that was passed on to me. And I went and I've been out to her farm a couple of times now. As I said, she also has a community garden, which is awesome. But right now, I think the major efforts that she's involved with are ones that in ordinary times our students could go and participate in. And perhaps they'll be able to, again, since she does have safe distancing, you have to have a commercial license to be able to put up food. Our garden, we can give away the food. And as long as you don't process it in any way, it's perfectly fine to get the food shelter, the food distribution centers like the Share and Care Closet, or to shelters, or to the Thrifty Beaver. So we have all of those ideas in mind. We want the garden as much as possible, despite, right, you've been hearing about the background of faculty and community involvement. We want this to be student-led in as much as possible. So I applied for your job and for course preceptors, and then turn the design project over to the class to create. And of course, there's deadlines and nudging and practical advice, and then institutional parameters to work with. But my students did a fantastic job of being able to design around all of those, and I know that Gretchen students are going to do a lovely job as well. In terms of the future, I think that's kind of where it's going. She has a class now which she'll talk to you about. We have a class that we're co-teaching where we've combined a first-year seminar and a writing course together and in the honors program, and they will take over in the fall and help either harvest or plant fall crops, season extensions, get the garden ready for next year. I think that most of the summer we'll be building and growing very short crops.
I guess I just have one more question that's kind of just a closing statement about the overall. Do you think that it's like on a gauge now with the pandemic and everything like that, how essential is it that we start taking our food back and growing our own food?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. It's hugely important now. We saw with the pandemic initial crises where people were just going and buying everything, but we also saw a huge uptick in local gardening and local food creation. And I think that this has been a bit of a wake-up call. We don't necessarily need such huge, wide food distribution networks where we're getting food from who knows where, raised with what chemical, when we can raise it locally ourselves. There's a great deal of independence. There's a sense of camaraderie. Community gardening in this era has got some very simple protocols to be able to keep distance and keep hands and equipment clean, to be able to limit spread. And it becomes another way that people can connect with what we're calling the real, to be able to grow food that you can process, but to also be able to share that with people. I think that with the pandemic, there's definitely a heightened awareness and interest in growing local food. But even prior to that, the Honors Program Director, John Messier, has talked about business incubators. And what a wonderful thing to be able to do here in Farmington, to be able to think about ways that we can raise food, but also create distribution centers, food processors. There's a ton of creative ideas out there. I'm very optimistic and hopeful that this is a sustainable effort. People are very excited about it, and we will continue to be as we actually dig in and start to grow.